Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland. This is my introduction to the weekly newsletter for April the 20th. Essentially, this week we're seeing all the heads of government of the Commonwealth have arrived in London, and there's a lot of news and interesting articles about the Commonwealth. There's also been a bit of a setback as far as the House of Lords is concerned, because they're successfully defeating the government on various amendments to the Brexit bill and so forth. There's probably more bad news coming for them next week as well. But on the whole, it will be returned to the Commons, and it's likely that these amendments will be defeated when it gets there, so no one's worrying too much at this stage. And also there's been quite a lot of discussion in Scotland about our economy, how our economy is not doing well, and there's various articles pointing out why we're not doing well and what we might need to do to fix the issues and stuff of that nature. So amongst all that, there's been quite a heavy amount of news this week. So the stories I've thus picked for you this week are a wee bit more than normal. First story is why we need to start building a Lego government. This is platform-based Lego government has huge potential benefits to both staff and citizens. I've always been of the view that I'm not sure that political parties are really fixing issues these days, and I often think there's maybe a different way we could look at governing ourselves. So I was quite interested in this article, so that's why I chose it. The next one is a brief history of now. It said market surveying in the US and London found Scotland scored high on history, landscapes and culture. It scored pretty badly on innovation, being trendy and forward-looking. Next story is Australian meeting clears the way for UK trade deal after Brexit. It says Australia will host a new round of trade talks with Britain with an eye to boosting exports worth $12.6 billion as Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull heads to London next week to build momentum for a deal. The next story is about Scotland missed an open goal with renewables. Failures of renewables to boost Scotland's manufacturing industry is massive own goal, writes Brian Wilson. This is the thing about the fact that we're leading the world as far as renewable energy goes, but we aren't building any of it. It's all being imported. And so I think we question, well, where's the benefit to Scotland in these renewables? Next story is you can't argue against socialism's 100% record of failure. And that resonated with me because I've been commenting recently about how, with having left-wing governments around, there still seems to be huge wage gaps. Lots of children go to school hungry, not having had anything to eat. And I just think that's unconscionable, to be honest with you. So I wanted to highlight that story. Also, there's another article saying Scotland is now horribly divided. Lukewarm reception for Scotland is now here at home reminds us, in other words, of the profound truth that if Scotland is now, then one aspect of today's politics, it reflects with heart-rending accuracy, is the tendency towards profound and completely disabling political division, often as matters of culture and identity. And of course we are horribly divided. As you know, the referendum for Scottish independence, 45% voted for it and 55% voted against it. But these are fairly substantial numbers, and it was a very high turnout. But ever since then, we've just continued to be divided. So anyway, I thought that was a story. If you want to know what Scotland's getting up to, you should read that. Another wee story I found was America's founding was all about the money. It's the making of America by England's merchant adventurers. So I thought for you Americans out there that might be kind of interesting wee article to read. Next one is the mysterious stone rose of Scotland's far north. They are perhaps the less fashionable little brothers of Scotland's magnificent standing stones, but no less fascinating. Then also I read this one, J.D. Wetherspoon shuts all 900 pubs' social media accounts. It says the pub chain said the move also takes account of recent concerns over the misuse of personal data and the addictive nature of social media. So I'm just wondering if that's a start of a change in social media. Don't know, but it's again interesting article to consider. Next one I found was Prince Harry promises to listen as he starts a new Commonwealth job. Britain's Prince Harry has been appointed a Commonwealth Youth Ambassador, his highest profile public role to date, and a job that will see him working with his future wife, encouraging young people to use the network of mostly former British colonies. And that of course chimes in with the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. Also another one I noticed, this Canadian firm takes over Bifad Yards. Said the Trouble Bifad engineering firm has been taken over by a Canadian company in a move that could save hundreds of jobs in Fife and on Lewis. Next one is Scotland lags behind most other countries in international trade. Then I've got one, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi vows his country will be an even closer trading partner to Britain after Brexit. Then again, continuing the Commonwealth theme, there's a very good article on the Commonwealth advantage. Trading with the bloc offers buoyant economic prospects. Story of ancient Dalriada Kingdom to be told at Crinan Canal. The story of Britain's most beautiful shortcut and the ancient coastal kingdom of Dalriada is set to be brought to life. Then another one I found was The Nasty Party is Back. This is obviously the Tories, but again, you need to put up counter arguments from time to time. Queen asked the Commonwealth to put Prince Charles in charge, and I noticed Justin Trudeau of Canada agreed with that suggestion, so that's a start anyway. And then another one, here's how the world is leaving Scotland behind. As I said, I told you there was a lot of stories that are a bit negative about Scotland, but we need to read those and consider them. And finally, how much is enough? Scotland puts the cart before the horse. So that's the final news story I have for you this week. On the Electric Canadian front, a transaction of the Canadian Society of Civil Engineers. I'm continuing to put volumes up there. This week I've added the volume for 1934. I've also got another one, my Canadian Journal, which is 1872 to 8. This is extract from my letters home, written while Lord Dufferin was Governor General by the Marchioness of Dufferin. And so, again, it's her diaries about a time in history, obviously, and it's I don't know, I always like reading these because it shows you how things went on in those days. My self-reliance, I decided to do a page for that on the site because this is a chap that's building a cabin in Ontario in a remote area. And he's also doing a lot of, it shows you how from the start, how he's building the cabin and how having built it, he's improving it so that his family can move in and live there. I personally have loved this article, and he's got a lot of self-reflections at the end of each video in which he gives us his take on things. And I think these are quite interesting to listen to as well. Then, as I featured the Marchioness of Dufferin, I found a wee article which was Ontario's farewell to Lord Dufferin. So his farewell address to the Canadian citizens. So I thought you might like to read that wee book. I have one article out from Conrad Blank which says Trump rises in the polls. So that's Electric Canadian for you. On the Electric Scotland side, I'm continuing with the Commonwealth of Australia by adding volume 4 to the 19-volume series. Trails of the Pathfinders. This is by George Baird Grinnell. It's published in 1911, and it's about some of the real characters that basically were pathfinders in North America, and gives you a bit of biography and history about them, which is very readable. Then I've got History, Ancestors and Children of James and Agnes Archibald. It's 1789 to 1875. And they've done a bit of an update on the PDF file they sent me some years ago, and some more information in their appendix. So they sent me the 2 replacement PDF files, which I've now replaced on the site. So if you're interested in them and the ancestors, you can read those. Then I got in Best Newfangled Family Tree. This is section 2 of the May 2018 issue. Lots of good reading in that, as always. Then I have also updated a lot of videos in crofting agriculture, simply because, again, with YouTube, videos can go down. And I noticed 2 had disappeared, so I've had a look around and found 2 to replace it. So you might want to have a wee through the videos on crofting there. And then as my theme on New Zealand this week, I've put a book up called Glimpses of Old New Zealand, compiled and edited by John Rawson Elder. This is in 1924. I've also got another one up on the historical records of New Zealand. It's a bit along the lines of the Australian series, but just in 2 volumes. But I put those up. I've also got the Religious Anecdotes of Scotland. I don't know if you remember, but I've actually got a section up for the Scottish anecdotes. But these are particularly religious ones, so I've decided to add that book to a page on the Scottish anecdotes. So I hope you'll enjoy reading those. I've got a Sportsman's and Naturalist Tour in Sutherlandshire. It's by Charles St. John. It's published in 1891. I know reading the book, it's quite fascinating. I've enjoyed reading the book, but I'm also cringing a bit because in those days they're quite happy to shoot ospreys and steal their eggs. And of course to do that today is illegal and is very much frowned upon. But that's the way they lived back in those days, which is why ospreys are comparatively rare. So again, by reading the book you understand why things are as they are today, because clearly what they did then is not as acceptable today. But anyway, that's another one for you to read. I've also got a new Robert Burns Lives article in from Frank Shaw. It's about Robert Burns and the Philosopher by Walter McGinty. This is him actually reviewing a book. Actually, Frank says, sometime back I published on this site a review of Walter McGinty's book entitled Abraham Lincoln and Robert Burns, and today I'm happy to report that he has now published a volume on Burns and philosophers. Yes, I am taking the unusual approach of using an email from McGinty about his new book, rather than review from yours truly. After I first read the email, I found myself being drawn back to it several times and came to the conclusion he had reviewed the book for me, and I did not see where I could improve on the explanation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So the article's there. And finally, The Story of New Zealand. It's another book about New Zealand. This time it's a history of New Zealand from the earliest times to the present. And bearing in mind this is published in 1904, so before the First World War. with special references to the political, industrial and social development of the island. So I felt that covered areas that the other books hadn't covered, like industrial and social development and so forth. And again, to celebrate the fact that this is the big Commonwealth Conference, I've got an article up saying the Commonwealth Advantage, trading with the bloc offers buoyant economic prospects. So I thought that was a really good article, and so I thought I'd make that the story for this week. And they actually put quite a few charts up, so I put a link to the actual article that's online, and on that online article you'll find the charts that it references. So that's the newsletter for this week. I hope you enjoy some of the material that I've mentioned and some of the news articles, and enjoy a good read. And as always, I'll put a link to the actual newsletter in the description under this video. So thanks for listening, and look forward to talking to you next week. Cheers!